Brian, I'll start with you. I got to start on the story of Poilievre because I think 24 hours ago or whatever, 16 hours ago, we would have been having a different conversation. He did increase the share of the vote substantially, the number of seats. By many accounts, if you take out the expectations last year, it is a success for the party. But you have to take into account those expectations, the fact they lost, and then his own seat. Like, what does that do to your calculation of whether he can stay or go?
Everything you laid out is very important and try to calculate what's going to happen. I would only add the history of the last two leaders after they were unsuccessful at forming government, and clearly the Conservatives had very little patience for the last two leaders. Obviously, different set of circumstances, different types of leaders, different approaches, not necessarily meaning that's a pro or a con, but doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly what would happen in this case. But your point, I think, is very good. He has such great things to point to that in isolation would make a lot of sense to give him another shot. Basically, look at the vote percentage, look at the way in which we have been able to deliver seats, look at the way in which we were able to keep this government to a minority, all these kind of things that typically would work. But expectations will drive some emotions for some. And of course, the idea that people will have maybe their own ambitions, their own views, how Poilievre was as a leader and how his team was. But to me, the most important one is the fact that he doesn't have a seat. I think if he had a seat, it would make it a lot easier, practically speaking, to be able to make the arguments that we went through. And I think there would probably be more flexibility and patience. Without having a seat, practically speaking, it makes it a lot more difficult, in my opinion.
Lisa, how much harder do you think it makes it? And what other factors will you be kind of taking into account when trying to figure out whether he stays or goes?
Well, it just feels like he's got one hand tied behind his back as he's going to try to lead the opposition in opposing this government. And it just, the optics aren't good in terms of how he's going to be able to position and fight it. Who is going to speak for the official opposition in the House of Commons? Because somebody's going to have to stand up and do the questions during question period, and they're going to have to represent. And the, you know, the stylization of the title is now just going to be the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. He's no longer the leader of the official opposition because he can't be, because he doesn't have a seat. All of these things are really difficult in terms of narrative and framing. I don't know whether or not people have landed on the calculus of how much Pierre was responsible for the big movement in the numbers and the seats. I think people are thinking through that. And as that kind of ruminates and settles, then we'll see whether people are going to be taking a point of view as to whether or not he gets to have a chance. There are two places where he's going to have to get the confidence of his people, and one is in caucus and the other one is at the National Convention, where we do a leadership review after the loss of an election. So he's going to have to face caucus, he's going to have to face membership. Those are not easy hills to climb, and we'll see where that goes. But Vashi, one thing about Mr. Blanchet and the clip package that you showed, I thought it was really interesting that he warned the Liberals to not get offensive on oil. What the heck does that mean?
I thought that would jump out. I promise we're going to talk about that in a second, because that does make for some interesting discussions about what happens next in Parliament and who the dance partners are. Tom, I wanted to get your take as someone who has made the decision about, you know, timing and when to step away. We were together in studio last night on whether or not you think Poilievre will continue to try and hang on, or if you ultimately think that the loss of the seat will be a deciding factor for him.
It'll be a decisive factor, but I don't know if it'll be the deciding factor. I think that Poilievre has shown an ability that if he'd had another week or two, might have seen the lines on those graphs cross. You know, he was 4, 5, 6 points, 7, most polling, 7 points behind 2 weeks out. And that kept narrowing, and that's what the pollsters kept telling us. And last night, they were within hailing distance of the overall vote count of the Liberals, 2 percentage points apart. What the Conservatives under Poilievre pulled off in that southwestern part of Ontario that includes places like Windsor was absolutely masterful. It was largely done. Nobody saw it coming. It was a sweep. It was a blue wall. And what was most interesting for me as a former leader of the NDP, who worked very closely with union leaders and depended on them a lot, is the union leaders were once again telling the NDP that the NDP had their support, but the workers were deciding something completely different. They were so worried about Trump. They were so worried about their jobs. They were listening to to the pitch that Pierre Poilievre was making. And that's one of the reasons why I think we might have every ability to get through this. It's true that whether it was Andrew Scheer or Aaron O'Toole, they weren't able to hold on. But if you look at the numbers here, you have to go all the way back to the Mulroney year to see a number like that for the Conservatives across Canada. Are there things that Poilievre has to change? There are parts of his approach, his personality, keeping journalists off the plane is just a way of talking about his inability to deal with the normal rules of the game. He wants to upset those rules. He thinks he can upend them. He wants to continue. I don't think he's not going to have any trouble finding a good Conservative MP with an ultra-safe riding, preferably within driving distance of Ottawa, who will give up their seat in return for something else that they can offer him. And Mr. Poilievre would be able to get re-elected in the House, because there's no small irony in the fact that the best debater of his generation is now deprived of his voice in the House of Commons.
Yeah, this. I think Tom makes a point about like how caucus will essentially, or even the membership, kind of view Mr. Poilievre and the degree to which that will ultimately determine whether he stays or goes, because it has been determinative in the past two instances with Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer. I remember it, I'm sure vividly like you do, Benzie, right? Yeah. Particularly initially in the case of Andrew Scheer, where there were people who were going on TV to say that he should step down. Like, it was a slow burn, but it was a public one. And then it sort of factions of the party turned on Mr. O'Toole for his pivot to the center during the campaign. I don't necessarily get the sense like that he's lost a lot of support in that way, but I do think there were some concerns from Conservatives about, in his caucus about the way that the campaign was run and the degree to which they're not allowed to say anything. And I wonder if that maybe becomes part of the conversation too.
I think it does, Vashi. Tories are very good at regicide, and the thing that the problem I think Mr. Poilievre has is when things started to go better for them in their polling, when he wasn't in their ads, when they did the golf ad and the seniors ad, he wasn't front and center in their advertising in the last weeks. Why? Because he was a problem. Lisa made news in this very panel a couple of weeks ago when she admitted that at the doors people were saying that they liked the Conservative program, they just didn't really like the leader. They would have preferred to have Mark Carney deliver that program. And I think that was a very astute observation, because I think Poilievre is going to try to hang on. I'm not so 100% sure that he will be able to hang on. I think that if I'm Mark Carney has 169 seats. He beat Poilievre by 25 seats. Yes, they only won by two percentage points higher in the popular vote. And yes, Ontario was not as good for the Liberals as it had been in the past. But you don't think that Mr. Carney could convince one or two Tories to maybe cross the floor? You don't think that Carney could neutralize the New Democrats for a little while? I mean, there are lots of moving parts here. And Mr. Poilievre is wounded. May not be mortally wounded, but he lost his seat. And we have the same thing here in Ontario. Bonnie Crombie, the Liberal leader, she did better for her party, but she didn't win, and she lost her seat. She's hanging on for now. But John Tory, who I was speaking to this morning, used to be the mayor of Toronto. Before that, he was the Progressive Conservative leader. He lost his seat in the 2007 election and hung on and tried to win a by-election, then finally resigned after losing a by-election that he engineered in, getting a caucus member to quit. I mean, I think Tom makes a good point. There are a lot of opportunities and options for Mr. Poilievre to find a safe riding in a by-election. But he is wounded. Let's not kid ourselves. This is a guy who was ahead by 25 percentage points on New Year's Day. And when we all talked in the new year, we were talking about how many seats the Conservative majority would be, not whether he would have win his seat. Yeah.
And I guess your reporting on that riding, Benzie, was not made up as so many accused, eh? Right? Yeah, you were right on the money.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Pastor. Yeah. When we broke that story, they were like saying it was mischief. Sorry, it wasn't. It was the fact.
I said that. Yeah, I said that.
Well, it's good that we came to agreement tonight.
No one wanted to call you out, Lisa.
Yeah, no.